Good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, sincere apologies for our technical issues. I think we have got most people on now, so we're going to make a start. Thank you for joining us for our fifth and final Falls Awareness Week webinar. Ironically, technology-based. But anyway, I shall leave that ironic thought with you. This session is hosted by the Falls Prevention Network and supported by Medline, and it is being recorded. So following our sessions on post-falls management, we're now expanding the discussion into the area of long lies and what free technology is out there to help us manage these patients. So for this session, we're delighted to have Tara Marshall, who's director of These Hands Academy. Tara is going to look at a number of algorithms that are out there and evaluate their impact from a clinical perspective. As many of you will know, after spending 25 years working in the NHS as an intensive care nurse, Tara found her home in patient safety. And in 2019, she was invited to take a role as deterioration clinical lead for the Eastern Patient Safety Collaborative, adding quality improvement and programme management to her skill set. So she is now supporting health and social care systems to undertake a system-wide quality improvement programs through her own consultancy, These Hands Academy. So as with the previous sessions, everyone will be on mute throughout the session, so please put your questions into the Q&A panel as we go, and we will come to them at the end. Okay, right, now, next bit. Let me get Tara on the screen. Right, there we go, that one, and then Tara's slides, send live. Over to you, Tara.
Thank you very much. I can only see you, Simon, so I'm just going to crack on anyway. Hopefully you can all see me. So, hi, my name is Tara Marshall and I am now the director of These Hands Academy, and we work across systems now to support system-wide transformation. And Simon has already enlightened you as to my clinical background, and there is a reason I do no longer work clinically as such, as in hands-on, and we'll come to that throughout this presentation. So free falling, it is not all doom and gloom, apparently. So let's have a think about that today. All of us want to make a difference, but we also associate falling with the older generation. And most of that is because it's associated with the healing. And it takes us longer to do that the older we get. However, we are living in a more healthy nation, but one that is getting older and living longer with more comorbidities. So there's lots of other things that factor into falls when we fall. And this week, I know you'll have heard from a lot of clinical experts, so I'm not going to talk too much around clinical aspects of falling, more how we can manage them better and how we can identify people and potentially prevent them from falling in the first place, because it costs us nothing to fall over, but it costs us a lot of money when we have. And the impact on that is not just the impact on the NHS and services. The biggest impact is on us personally and how we manage that moving forwards. And falls can be life-changing. Throughout this presentation, you are going to see a slide like this. I want you to use that opportunity to put questions in the chat and start thinking about what I've said and what I might say, because I'm going to make people think in this presentation and maybe think about a bit of a curveball as well and take you out of what is we are structured in the NHS to something that we could potentially do differently. So let's start with all of us. This is us as a generation, we all party, and this has got some tech related slides to it. This slide is AI generated, so we can do it and we can be a little bit different, but essentially falls can happen to all of us and at any times in our lives. We just cope with them better, potentially when we're a bit younger. But the majority of us have to work, and the costs of injuries at work really start to mount up when we think about days lost for work-related illnesses, but also think about going back to work. Some of us have to change our career, and it can be career limiting, especially if you have an injury that prevents you from doing the job you did before. So if we think about that from our personal aspect and families, house adaptations, all of those things start really adding in to what could be just a small fall. The cost of that is enormous. But aside from money, it's how we live our lives, and we do this differently once something has happened. We also need to think about our retirement age. Our retirement age is 65, and yet we spend millions of pounds with work-related injuries. And some of us won't get a pension until we're 66. So we haven't got a lot of fun before we turn into an old person that's going to fall over from somebody that was working fit and healthy not 12 months before. And when we think about NHS data, this is front door data. So a lot of this is collected because we collect it as people get admitted to hospital. So for people living without a fall and without anything that could potentially have happened to them, that's the data we don't see. So this is the data that we do see. However, it does highlight that 1 in 3 of us over 65, and remember we don't get a pension until we're 66, have had a fall. And then we get to 80 and we're likely to have a fall every year. But it also leaves 1 in 5 of us with a broken bone or a head injury. And both of those can be life-changing. So it really can impact immensely on how we live, how we work, and essentially how we play. However, there are 66 million people in this country, and we only have a limited amount of capacity to look after those people. And when you compare acute to non-acute, there is a huge difference, but also there's a huge opportunity there to think about how we manage people differently. We've got 14,000 care homes, because some people that fall go into hospital and might not be able to go home again. And that really does limit the choice of how you live and where you live. And for a lot of people, that will be a high cause of anxiety. It will also isolate them from friends and family, because potentially they can't go back to exactly where they were or in the same place. Of those care homes, 70% of them are residential homes, and there are differences between the two. The 30% that are nursing homes, people tend to live in for a shorter length of time than they do residential homes. And you can live in a residential home essentially from the age of 18 if you have a learning disability, or 55 if you don't. But for people that do live at home, that are over the age of 70, nearly 30% of them already access some care home support. So there's an awful lot of people, 11 million of them, where there are opportunities to A, not fall, and B, prevent it from happening through other means that we can create early warning systems for. So what do we do about our key interventions? We've got policy changes, we've had policy changes, we've got key performance indicators, we've got NICE guidance, we've got improvements in equipment, and we talk about it a lot. We've now got world guidance. For our communities and more locally, we've now got our ICSs that are funding all of our services, which has generated community teams and starting to put more emphasis into the community of, again, how we look after people and how we manage them. But our biggest policies are our Health and Social Care Act and our Health and Safety at Work Act, of which all of you, I would think at some point, come across as part of your daily work. And it may be about the equipment you use, or it may be about the place that you use it, or the quality indicators that start to think about, have we got it right and can we do better? However, we still fall, and 20% of those people that fall break something. They fracture hips, they fracture wrists, they fracture arms, depending on how they put their hands down first. A lot of people, when we're young, we tend to put our wrists out in front of us. Older people don't always do that. And they fall in different places, but they do have a lot of head injuries. We also have a lot of comorbidities, and that impacts on how we manage and treat people that do fall. And when we go into hospital, that time can be extended because we're older, and sometimes it's because we haven't got a place to go at the end of it. And of course, fixing all of this, it can reduce your confidence potentially in the work that you did. This is an X-ray of me, actually. I broke my leg in 6 different places, just tripping up a step. But it absolutely impacted on the career I had, running around with critical care teams, resuscitation teams, and being able to attend a patient really quickly. So I had to think very differently about how I worked and how I managed the team that I was working with. For the older people, going into hospital, if you've got an extended stay, it can lead to deconditioning. Now, there's a lot of work going on around deconditioning, but it also adds longer rehabilitation to us. It can potentially make us really isolated because we can't get out and about and do the things we used to do. And for some of us, we can't return home. We can't return home to our community. We can't return to the people that we know and work with and play with and do our activities out of work with. And that can make a really big difference into our mental health. So what else? The worst thing that can happen to our bodies? Long lies. We talk about those a lot, especially in the community. Not so much in acute, because in acute, people don't tend to lie in a long place after a fall. There's a whole team there to collect our patients and pick them up. But when we're at home, we can have fallen and somebody might not have found us for hours. And that can really create some damage for us. Our muscles break down. The toxins that come out of those can lead to kidney failure because we can't process them. We have an increased lactate. We have cell death at the end of that, and then the muscles die, kidney failure, and then on top of any other chronic condition, we can really stack up some problems for us when we go into places like intensive care. And it can result in an intensive care bed. It can result in your kidneys never recovering and having to rely on dialysis for such a long time. Our pressure sores can lead to infections. So really, all of this, if we can pick somebody up early, or ideally prevent them from falling over in the first place, we have a real opportunity to make a difference. And that's what we're all here for. So some of these complications, previous falls, when you lack confidence, you tend to fall over again because you tend to worry about what you're doing. I certainly don't run up concrete steps anymore. And I think twice about going out on slippy floors. And I'm considered to be a young, fit, healthy person. So for somebody older, it must be really challenging. And we also live with other complex health conditions that we can't react to as closely as we could before. We have medication, things like warfarin, create extra bleeding risks and often result in us having multiple CT scans when we go into hospital. And for those of us with complex needs, again, it's understanding what's happening to us. And what is happening to us is an absolute trauma. It's something that shouldn't have happened. We weren't expecting it. We didn't plan for it. And a lot of us really don't manage it that well. But there are soft signs for people to look for in the community. And we talk about this around low urine output, how frequently people are getting up and going to the toilet. People are often tired after a fall. We may not see all the signs, but they are tired. So that's a change in their normal behaviour. We will see potentially some confusion or agitation. Again, it's all about behaviour change, to think about soft signs and think about how we might manage that if we're not in an acute setting. People will be sore. If you fall over, you are going to be sore if you've done some damage. And we might not be able to see that damage through bruising or kidney failure through dark urine and our outputs. But they are there, and they're there for us to look out for. So how else can we look after people if they're not in hospital, or we want to get them home from hospital really early? And this is where we start talking about things like the virtual wards. They're popping up now across the NHS, and they're making a huge difference. But they can also do an awful lot more. They can think about our waiting lists and how long and how we're managing people on some of those waiting lists. So we can help to get people home with a virtual ward, and a virtual ward connects somebody at home with somebody that's a clinician. And they don't necessarily have to be in a hospital. They could be in a community hospital, or it could be a clinic that's run from their GP or some other full service. So we can have virtual wards that are specialised in a condition or specialised in a treatment. And we can also use them for mental health. So I'm just going to go on to a thinking point slide, mainly so I can breathe, but also I want you to think about how you could use a virtual ward and help people with falls, who've had a fall, get out of hospital quicker to prevent that deconditioning. So get your questions in, because Simon needs work to do. So let's think a little bit more about non-acute care, because that's where we fall over. And my slides are stuck. There we go. So post-fall, we've fallen over. We have got some national guidance around that, and it talks about checking people for spinal injuries and checks by healthcare professionals. What happens if you're not in a hospital? What happens if you're not somewhere where somebody can get some manual handling equipment to you really early? You end up lying on the floor for potentially a long time, and we go back to that long lie. Some of this is avoidable, and it's avoidable harm, and we can make a difference. So there are some assessment tools that are now available, but it comes down to your basics: look, listen, feel. A lot of them have a similar outcome, and it is about assessing people early, getting them up, and making sure we don't cause another injury. So identifying that people can get up, and if they can get up, we get them up safely. So it's also around managing equipments. But now, as with everything else in the world, we've got an app for it. So we have iStumble that is on an app, and we can download this so people in their own homes can use it. They don't have to have the whole protocol. It's as simple as that, and we can make things a lot more easier for them. In our care homes, we've spent many years now at NHS Improvement helping care homes understand vital signs, understand deterioration, and how to look for changes, and then take those vital signs and use a common language to talk to other people within the NHS, and that's news too. So for all of you that are working clinically, you'll all be familiar with this, because it's now rolled out across the country, across our ambulance trusts, across our mental health trusts, and now it's rolling out into our care homes and our communities. And I would positively encourage people to use this even in their own homes, because it really does break down those challenges of what my information is and can that be translated to how you need to hear it. So we start to pick people up off the floor, and again, there's lots of equipment out there. There are the lovely people like Medline that are here to support us, and they're absolutely supporting this week. But we need confidence to use those. So we need training and we need support in how to deliver that. And a lot of companies now are doing an awful lot more work around the integration of their product with the people that are using them to build that confidence and to make a difference on how we use it. And they are all doing the same thing. They all want to lift people up or they want to manually move people, but there are different types for different things, and there are horses for courses, and some will work differently to others. But they are all out there, and they all regulated through the Health and Social Care Act and the Regulated Activities Act, which is a bit of a mouthful when you're halfway through. However, let's go back to our care homes again, because our care homes is where we can collect some data. It's difficult to collect data from people in their own homes, but if we think about care homes, a lot of people are more likely to fall than they are in their own home, which is odd, isn't it? But again, there's over 14,000 care homes, of which the residential homes don't provide nursing, but they do provide tasks such as mobility. So they can support people with washing and dressing, and whereas nursing homes often means that people have more needs than that. But we're moving on from care homes now. We're starting to think about care villages, and potentially you live in those villages for all of your lives, but for all of your older life. But it does address some of the challenges around having an injury and not being able to go home to where you were before. And it may mean, if you live in a residential home now, that a care home and you need some care home support, it could be in a very different area than you had that before. And some of this comes around to the funding as well. So you have a funding package when you leave hospital. Some of those take time to sort out. But a care village is technically somewhere where you go when you start off there really fit, and you work through from a residential perspective. Within that village will be a care home, and it'll be a care home with nursing. So essentially, if you do go into hospital and you have to come back to a different part of that village, that is better or easier than coming back to somewhere completely different. And the staff will often be the same. So there'll be some familiarity around how you live if you chose to live in a retirement village. However, our health and care homes framework, there is a framework for all of them to work towards, but I want to point out to a couple of bits that are actually in the red in this, and this is around joined up commissioning. So previously we had our CCGs, we had our NHS budgets and our social care budgets, and now within our ICSs it is one budget. So technically, we have joined up commissioning, and it should lead to more collaboration between health and social care. So we start to think about the person's journey throughout those services and those systems and back in again. We talk about enhanced primary care and community support, and that is aligned with that joined up commissioning. So our care homes are now all aligned to a GP, whereas previously they weren't. They often have more support with being aligned with pharmacies. There's community dentists, although they're rare. They are a bit like hen's teeth, but they are out there. And when we think about other services that come into care homes, there's chiropody, there's OT, there's activities, there's wellness, there's loads of stuff going on in care homes that we don't always give them credit for. We have our falls prevention team. There's a whole piece in there around the enhanced care home framework, around working with rehabilitation teams, with thinking about strength and balance and how we get people up and moving in the morning. The Academy of Fab Stuff, the End PJ Pajama Paralysis, all of those initiatives are about keeping us fit and healthy and not sitting around in corners. And then there's data, IT and technology, which I really like, but there is a balance with this. And this balance has to be that it enhances what we do and it adds value. It doesn't replace staff. They are few and far between as it is. So we don't want to be replacing people, but what we do want to do is use technology to release time to care, not create more work. So we want to use it so we're not creating duplication. We don't want to create unintended consequences, but we do want to be able to have one version of the truth. And this is where data and technology can really start to work around a personal care record. So people don't repeat what they have to say 16 times over, and we don't get the Chinese whispers where somebody starts a journey with potentially a fall and they've injured an elbow, and by the time they get to the front door of a hospital, we've turned that into a knee. If we have one care record, we can understand people on their journey as they go from A to B. And then we think about how do we recognise deterioration? And some of you, I'm sure, will on the call will know about News 2. You'll be familiar with SBAR. Restore 2 is a tool that puts them all together in the same place. But what we focus on, and we don't do this in acute, is soft signs. We don't talk about that gut feeling. We don't talk about, hang on a minute, I'm worried about somebody. But what soft signs do in the community in our care home is help people translate those worries and concerns into a clinical language. They then take a set of vital signs. We then talk about News 2 as a common language. And then we have a structured conversation using SBAR that we are all familiar with. And it saves time. I'm not going to say it saves lives because we don't have the evidence, but we do know it saves time. We do know it improves confidence. And actually, those people working in care homes are the experts on their residents. They know them best. This helps them tell us about them. And it's so, so important at the front door. So let's go back to technology and around telehealth. So there's lots of different definitions around remote monitoring, but we think about the virtual wards. We think about monitoring outside of a clinical setting. So we're not in intensive care anymore. We haven't got a bank of machines. We haven't got a bank of syringe drivers and monitors. We have got obs in a box, which is what I call it. Telehealth allows a patient to communicate with a clinician in a virtual setting, very similar to what we're doing today. Telecare allows or is there to enable people to remain independent. So we're looking at other things like falls pendants, some of the things that you will spot in acute services, but also in our own homes. So the emergency pulls on light switches, the care tags that will, when you fall, you can press a button and somebody will call through a speaker that's placed onto the wall of your home. But what telehealth solutions can do is really start to connect us all together. So it provides information when people go to secondary care, as long as it's integrated within the other systems. It allows responders to have information really early. It allows primary care to make early decisions, but it also allows them to have a bird's eye view across several homes or communities that they're working within. And our community care settings, our falls teams and our clinicians can monitor people in different places, but all from one central command centre. And for people in our care homes, and soon it'll be our own homes, because we're all starting to use this technology, and they'll be ahead of us, people in their own homes, but it allows us to create improved autonomy in the work that people do. It gives us continuous access to training, which normally would be once a year, or when the companies go in and do their first initial training. A lot of this is now available on the devices that people use. And it also promotes better end-of-life care. And that is one of the things that we really should be thinking about, because whatever happens with a fall, we are all going to die at some point, but that fall may well expedite that to something that's sooner than we expected. So it helps us to understand that as well. And hopefully this will give you a quick look at what that can do and how it works. I call it OBS in a box. There's lots of companies that do this one. This one particularly is the Wizan company that I've done some work with. We are now using these in homes of supported living and people with learning disabilities. They are that simple in how they can use them. So let me just play this for you. You should be able to hear that.
Tara, we haven't got any sound. Was there sound with it? We haven't got any sound coming through.
Your blood pressure is 121/67. Your blood oxygen is 96%. Your pulse is 60 beats per minute. Temperature is 36.4 degrees Celsius, 97.5 degrees Fahrenheit.
So that was Paul. I'm sorry you didn't get the sound for it, but essentially what this equipment can do, as it's Bluetooth, all Bluetooth enabled and paired. So if you use Bluetooth with some of this equipment, then it will repeat the readings to you, removing the translation challenges with the old News 2 charts where people have written and scribbled all over them and nobody can understand them. But it also lets people know that it's happened. So if something's repeated to you, you know immediately that that's taken place. So it's really helpful for people that are working in care homes, and they sometimes look after 40 or 50 different people within that home. So there's quite a lot of observations to do on a ward round. So it's really nice to know that it is working. But then if we think about how this is growing now, we've got wearables, we've got apps. We can monitor diabetes, we can monitor our nutrition. The new Zoe study is all over the telly that people are doing. So it's not just about OBS in a box anymore. It's about keeping us well in the places that we want to live in. And we can move on to that from behaviour focused technology. How can this help us in our own home? So it can help us through monitoring medication, reminding us to take them, but we can also put sensors within homes, on doors and windows, and water. So if we had a sensor on our main water intake into the home, we could have a message on that sensor to a friend or relative. If, for instance, the taps hadn't been turned on by 9 o'clock in the morning, you wonder if somebody's got up. Has the toilet been flushed? Has the kettle gone on? All of those kind of things sort of trigger those soft signs of worries. But that information through the Internet of Things, and we'll talk about the Internet of Things in a minute, it goes up to a secure cloud. It comes through your Wi-Fi in your home, but we can now send messages to various different places. We can send them to friends and families, but we can also add that into a medical record, and we can tie that into our personal care records and our GPs and other people like that. So again, I want you to have a quick think about what that might look, because it doesn't have to be intrusive. A lot of these sensors are very tiny and you can put them in all different places and you can have them repeat to you. You can work now with Siri and the lovely lady from Google who will tell you to go out and shut the door and maybe not go out because it's 2 o'clock in the morning and now's not the time to be wandering around. But there are other growing services like our response services. So a company like Visionable will connect clinicians. They run a stroke service, so they connect people that are having an acute stroke that could be in their own home as far in to our specialist services within hospitals. They've also got vehicles now that are starting to do this as well. So it doesn't necessarily prevent an admission to hospital, but what it does do is get the clinicians to the patient quicker, even if it's virtually. And that also helps reduce the harm or reduce the impact that has on a person's life moving forward following that event. So home assessments, we're going back now to people's homes again. We talk about home assessments and a lot of our OTs go out and do that when we've had a hospital visit. That again takes time. We have to put care packages in place, but it can also add to the time that we spend in hospital waiting for this to happen. So this again is where your virtual wards could potentially play a really good part in thinking about how we get people home quicker. But it does, as I say, have this interrelationship with funding. But we do have the Internet of Things, and the Internet of Things is very much like the sensors, but it is any single Bluetooth enabled device that we can use within a home. And we are getting more and more and more of them. So let's start putting them to some use to think how we might do this differently. And then, of course, there's integration and how this can work for us. So from an NHS perspective, we can look at quality improvement. From a personal perspective, we can look at improving our confidence. But we also think about, we've got a workforce and we've got a lot of challenges within that workforce within the NHS. So how do we design our services to keep up with this technology? Because it's not going to stop. But what we also need to do is think about how we can reduce some of the inequalities. So the Core 20+ programme looked at those at-risk groups around digital inclusion, but also around groups that aren't included in often our normal society. So how can we use technology to access those people, but also help them to access services as well? How can we sit around thinking around our social care integration and where most of us live? And it's not just about improving outcomes. It's not a sticking plaster as it was in COVID. COVID helped it grow, but it's now becoming everyday practice that we see technology coming up, and it's coming up quicker than we can keep up with it often. And people are starting to be in control of their own data. And that's going to be a game changer for people living within and using technology, because they'll start to control what it does for them rather than us telling them what to do. So from an innovation perspective, the world's your oyster with some of this stuff, but it has to have good value for money. And it can't just be about the return of investment that we see in the data sheets. It's about what it does for people that use it, because otherwise it sits on a shelf. So we need to think about short, medium and long-term usage of this. And we think about what could the future look like. And this is an AI generated slide, but it's not so far out the realms of possibility, because we've already talked about Visionable, who are already doing it. Equally, this is about us living in our own homes, how we want to live, that's not intrusive, but also supports us to live in the place that we want to for as long as possible. And we can use technology to do that. And we can use it to bring in support as and when we need it. And this is a huge, huge culture shift for a lot of people. And it will be as we move. It seems to have come at a really big impact over COVID, and now it's starting to settle down a bit. But a lot of this, when we start thinking about how we implement this, it's around communication, but it's also around enablement, and it's about enabling us more. And if we go back to Falls, so that we're not having the impact that we had. And we need to embed it as well. Otherwise, it's only as good as the box that it comes in. So coming back to communities, communities help us break the isolation, but they also help us build. They help us get back on our feet. They help us to have fun, but they also provide support. And there is a Compassionate Communities UK site that is in the resources at the end of this. Do have a look at it. They're amazing when they get running, because actually this is where we want to be. We want to be creative. We want to complement health, and they are like-minded people. And just going back to the title of this slide, this is what we should be doing when we get older. We shouldn't be in hospital. We shouldn't be sitting at home waiting for care to come in. Let's go have fun. Let's use technology. Let's make prevention happen. And let's do this as much as possible. And I will leave you with my contact details and the resource slide as well. And questions, Simon, I know people have probably been writing them down. So shall I stop sharing?
Yeah, just stop sharing, and then and we've got a few questions that have come in, which is great. I mean, obviously that was a brilliant session, Tara. There's obviously so much help out there. I suppose that it's how people access that, and it sounds like that Compassionate Communities resources is a good place to start. And thank you for taking us through all of that. I imagine there's probably a lot there for people to digest. So there's a few questions that have come in, and I'm sure as we start answering these, a few more will drop in as well. So can the Falls algorithms be incorporated into the 111 screening questions to limit unnecessary ambulance call-outs?
So the I Stumble was developed by the Welsh Ambulance Service. So they're the leads in this. And as far as I remember, they did incorporate it into 111 calls because it is part of the algorithm. Right. What we've done is move that further out. So rather than the questionnaire starts at a 111 call, the questionnaire now starts where you fall, if you fall in a care home. Okay. So essentially you're reducing that time, but also you're reducing the duplication.
Okay, great. And and then the water meter idea sounds like a smart energy meter. Could these also be tuned to generate an alert if energy usage is outside the normal ranges?
Potentially, you can do all sorts with, they are like a water meter. But what they do is they tell you an activity that's happened. It's up to the interpreter of that information, very similar to how we take a news score or a set of vital signs. They're only as good as the person that reads them. So if you have a sensor on a water meter or a water feed into a house, and the expectation is that your normal behaviour is that the toilet is flushed and you've had a shower before 9 o'clock in the morning. If nothing's happened, the person that's getting that message, it's up to them to go, actually, let's do something about it. Do I need to give them a call? What it can't do is look into those walls and say, actually, somebody's fallen over. So, you know, that's where other pieces of technology come in, like sensors, and you can map people falling and things like that. So it really depends on the possibilities are endless. You just need to find out what it is you need it to do.
Okay, great. And then, yeah, really sort of practical question, and one that I imagine lots of people will probably jump to straight away, is how much does it cost the patient? And what happens if they don't have the internet? I'm just thinking of me 85-year-old dad. And actually, that question's made me think about my parents as well, who are about as far from internet savvy as it's possible to get. So, yeah.
And that is exactly where we talk about reducing inequalities. There's a lot of programmes going on now within our local governments that are absolutely targeting those places where people don't have the accessibility to the internet, and it is generating a divide, but people are aware of that. So there is a foundation called the Good Things Foundation, where they are starting to think about how they help people get access to this. Our compassionate communities would be another really good group to think about how they can enable people. Our banks are already digital eagles at Barclays Bank. They're already starting to help people. So you only need one person in the front door, and potentially you open it up to everything else. Yeah,
brilliant. For any of the services to help keep patients out of hospitals, where would you start as a community falls lead? I'm assuming the compassionate communities is probably as good a place as any.
Yeah, I mean, again, as a communities falls lead, I'd be connecting with care homes a lot and thinking around virtual wards, telehealth, that kind of thing, and how you enable people in their own homes to connect with you, really. How are you accessible to them is the other way around it, because there's only a finite amount of people that we can spread. So it's how can we help them manage their time but still see as many people as possible through using things like telehealth.
Great. Okay. Well, I mean that, unless there's any other questions that anyone has got, I think we can probably wrap it up. Obviously, we're slightly late starting, so apologies for that. There's technical issues our end. So really, yeah, Tara, thank you ever so much. Thank you for bearing with us and keeping your cool when we were not anything but cool, trying to get this thing up and running. So yeah, really great session, just really broad coverage, and it's just amazing the amount of help that is actually out there, and it's just knowing where to start on a lot of it, I think. And yeah, and also just thank you to all of our great speakers that have spoken for us on this Falls Awareness Week webinar series last week and this week. And we had Nikki and Vanessa from Warrington, who did their maternity falls guidelines and the cross-functional work or cross-collaborative work between nursing and midwifery, which is really great to see. Obviously, Maddie's brilliant session on the stroke unit and the challenges of a changing environment and not necessarily a falls prevention friendly environment for stroke patients to move to, and how she's met that. Obviously, the Julies, Julie Whitney, Julie Windsor on the post-falls responses. And then at a more local level, Shona McKinnon yesterday with her post-falls management quality improvement project in Greater Glasgow and Clyde, and finally today Tara on the free falling session on the huge range of options we have. So yeah, I know a lot of time goes into prepping these sessions, and yeah, it can be quite nerve-wracking to deliver, especially through this sort of medium. So a massive thank you to all of our speakers, who do this on top of a very busy day job as well. So all the sessions have been recorded, and we have been putting them onto the Falls Practitioner Network workspace on Futures NHS. We will also build a page on the Medline website as well, where you will be able to also download obviously the slides, a certificate of attendance for revalidation. So yeah, just remains to say have a good rest of Falls Awareness Week. Thank you very much, and thank you for bearing with us today. Okay, bye.
Thank you.